What's up, guys? Welcome to part 8 of Reading the Big Short. I'm gonna break this part down into two parts, kind of like A and B of 15 minutes each, because I don't have 30 minutes exactly. So yeah, gonna get started now. On its surface, the booming market inside bets on subprime mortgage bonds seems to be the financial equivalent of fantasy football. A beneficially facsimile of investing. Alas, there was a difference between fantasy football and fantasy finance. When a fantasy football player drafts Peyton Manning to be on his team, he doesn't create a second Peyton Manning. When Mike Burry bought a credit default swap based on a Long Beach saving subprime backed bond, he enabled Goldman Sachs to create another bond, identical to the original in every aspect but one. There were no actual home loan or home buyers, only the gain and losses from the side bet on the bond were real. And so to generate $1 billion in triple B rated subprime mortgage bond, Goldman Sachs did not need to originate $50 billion in home loans. They did simply to entice Mike Burry or some other market pessimist to pick 100 different triple B bonds and buy $10 million in credit default swap on each of them. Once they had this package, a synthetic CDO, it was called, which was the term of art for a CDO composed of nothing but credit default swaps. They take it over to Moody's and the Standard & Poor's. The rating agencies didn't really have their own CDO models. Say one former Goldman CDO trader, the bank would send over their own model to Moody's and say, how does this look? Somehow roughly 80% of what had been risky triple B rated bond now look like triple A rated bonds. The other 20%, bearing lower credit rating, generally were more difficult to sell, but they could, incredibly simply, be piled up in yet another heap and reprocessed again into a AAA bond. The machine that turned 100% lead into an ore that was now 80% gold and 20% lead would accept the residual lead and turn 80% of that into gold too. The details were complicated, but the gist of this new money machine was not. It turned a lot of dicey loan into a pile of bonds, most of which were AAA rated. Then it took the lowest rated of the remaining bond and turned most of those into AAA CDOs. And then, because it could not extend home loan fast enough to create a sufficient number of lower rated bonds, it used credit default swaps to replicate the very worst of the existing bond many times over. Goldman Sachs stood between Mike Burry and AIG. Mike Burry forked out 250 basis points, 2.5%, to own credit default swap on the very crappiest triple B bonds, and AIG paid a mere 12 basis points, 0.12%, to sell credit default swap on those very same bonds, filtered through a synthetic CDO and pronounced AAA rated. There were a few other messy details. Some of the lead was sold off directly to German investor in Dusseldorf, but when the dust settled, Goldman Sachs had taken roughly 2% off the top, risk-free, and booked all the profit upfront. There was no need on either side, long or short, for cash to change hands. Both sides could do a deal with Goldman Sachs by signing a piece of paper, the original home mortgage loan, on whose fate both sides were betting, play no other role. In a funny way, they exist only so that their fate might be gambled upon. The market for synthetic removed any constraint on the size of risk associated with subprime mortgage lending. To make $1 billion bet, you no longer needed to accumulate $1 billion worth of actual mortgage loan. All you had to do was find someone else in the market willing to take the other side of the bet. No wonder Goldman Sachs was suddenly so eager to sell Mayberry credit default swap in giant $100 million chunk, or that the Goldman Sachs bond trader had been surprisingly indifferent to which subprime mortgage Mayberry bet against. The insurance Mayberry bought was inserted into a synthetic CDO and passed along to AIG. The roughly $20 billion in credit default swap sold by AIG to Goldman Sachs meant roughly $400 million in riskless profit for Goldman Sachs. Each year, the deal lasted as long as the underlying bond, which had an expected life of about 6 years, which, when you did the math, implied a profit for the Goldman Sachs trader of $2.4 billion. Wall Street's newest technique for squeezing profit out of the bond market should have raised a few questions. Why were supposedly sophisticated traders at AIG FP doing this stuff? If credit default swaps were insurance, why weren't they regulated as insurance? Why, for example, wasn't AIG required to reserve capital against them? Why, for that matter, were Moody and Standard & Poor's willing to bless 80% of a pool of dicey mortgage loan with the same AAA rating they best out on the debt of the US Treasury? Why didn't anyone inside Goldman Sachs stand up and say, this is obscene? The rating agency, the ultimate pricer of all these subprime mortgage loans, clearly do not understand the risk, and their idiocy is creating a recipe for catastrophe. Apparently, none of those questions popped into the mind of market insiders as quickly as another. How do I do what Goldman Sachs just did? Deutsche Bank especially felt something like shame that Goldman Sachs had been the first to find this particular pay dirt. Along with Goldman's, Deutsche Bank was the leading market maker in abstract mortgage derivatives. Dusdorf was playing some kind of role in the new market if there were stupid Germans standing ready to buy US subprime mortgage derivatives. Deutsche Bank should have been the first to find them. None of this was of any obvious concern to Greg Lippmann. Lippmann did not run Deutsche Bank's CDO business. A fellow named Michael Lamont did. Lippmann was merely the trader responsible for buying and selling subprime mortgage bond, and by extension, credit default swap on subprime mortgage bond. But with so few investors willing to make an outright bet against the subprime bond market, Lippmann's bosses asked Lippmann to take one for the team, in effect to serve as a stand-in for Mayberry, and to make an explicit bet against the market. If Lippmann would buy credit default swap from Deutsche Bank's CDO department, they too might do these trades with AIG before AIG woke up and stopped doing them. Greg was forced to get short into the CDOs, say a former senior member of Deutsche Bank's CDO team. I say forced, but you can't really force Greg to do anything. There was some pushing and pulling with the people who ran his firm's CDO operation, but Lippmann found himself uncomfortably short subprime mortgage bond. Lippmann had at least one good reason for not putting up a huge fight. There was a fantastically profitable market waiting to be created. Financial markets are a collection of arguments. The less transparent the market and the more complicated the security, the more money the trading desk at big Wall Street firm can make from the argument. The constant argument over the value of the share of some major publicly traded company has very little value, as both buyer and seller can see the fair price of stock on the ticket, and the broker's commission has been driven down by competition. The argument over the value of credit default swaps on the prime mortgage bonds, a complex security whose value was derived from that of another complex security, could be a goldmine. The only other dealer making serious market in credit default swaps was Goldman Sachs. So there was, in the beginning, little price competition. Supply, thanks to AIG, was virtually unlimited. The problem was demand. Investors who wanted to do my bearish trade. Incredibly, at this critical juncture in financial history, after which so much changed so quickly, the only constraint in the subprime mortgage market was a shortage of people willing to bet against it. To sell investors on the idea of betting against a prime mortgage bond, on buying his pile of credit default swap, Greg Lippmann needed a new and improved argument. Enter the great Chinese quant. Lippmann asked Ingen Su to study the effect of home prices appreciation on subprime mortgage loan. Ingen Su went off and did whatever the second smartest man in China does, and at length returned with a chart illustrating default rate in various home price scenarios: home price up, home price flat, home price down. Lippmann looked at it and looked again. The numbers shocked even him. They didn't need to collapse. They merely need to stop rising so fast. House prices were still rising, and yet default rate were approaching 4%. If they rose just 7%, the lowest investment grade bond rated triple B minus 1 to 0. If they rose to 8%, the next lowest rated bond rated triple B 1 to 0. At that moment in November 2005, Greg Lippmann realized that he didn't mind owning a pile of credit default swaps on subprime mortgage bond. They weren't insurance, they were a gamble, and he liked the odds. He wanted to be short. This was new. Greg Lippmann had traded bonds backed by various consumer loan, auto loan, credit card loan, home equity loans since 1991, when he had graduated from University of Pennsylvania and taken a job at Credit Suisse. He had never before been able to sell them short because they were impossible to borrow. The only choice he and every other asset-backed bond trader ever had to make was whether to like them or to love them. There was never any point in hating them. Now he could, and did, but hating them set him apart from the crowd, and that represented for Greg Lippmann a new career risk. As he put it to others, if you are in a business where you can do only one thing and it doesn't work out, it's hard for your bosses to be mad at you. It was now impossible to do more than one thing, but if he bet against a prime mortgage bond and was proven wrong, his bosses would find it easy to be mad at him. In the righteous spirit of a man bearing in inconvenient truth, Greg Lippmann, a copy of Shorting Subprime Mezzanine Trenches tucked under his arm, launched himself at the institutional investing public. He may have begun his investigation of the prime mortgage market in the spirit of a Wall Street salesman, searching less for the truth than for a persuasive sounding pitch. Now, shockingly, he thought he had an ingenious plan to make customers rich. He'll charge them flat fee to get in and out of their credit default swap, of course, but these would prove trivial compared to the fortune they stood to make. He was no longer selling, he was dispensing favors. Behold, a gift from me to you. Institutional investor didn't know what to make of him, at least not at first. I think he has some kind of narcissistic personality disorder, said one money manager who heard Lippmann's pitch but did not do his trade. He scared the shit out of us, said another. He comes in and describes this brilliant trade. It makes total sense. To us, the risk was, we do it, it works, then what? How do we get out? He controlled the market. He may be the only one we can sell to. And he says, you have no way out of this swimming pool but through me. And when you ask for the towel, I'm going to rip your eyeballs out. He actually said that he was going to rip our eyeballs out. The guy was totally transparent. They loved it in a way, but decided they didn't want to experience the thrill of eyeball removal. What worked against Greg, this fund manager said, was that he was too candid. Lipman faced the usual objection any Wall Street bond customers voice to any Wall Street bond salesman. If it's such a great trade, why are you offering it to me? But other less usual one to buying credit default swap means paying insurance premium for perhaps years as you wait for American home owners to default. Bond market investors, like bond market traders, was viscerally resist any trade that they had to pay money to be in, and instinctively sought out traders that paid them just for showing up in the morning. One big bond market investor, Kristen, his yard positive carry, trades where you fork over 2% a year just to be in them were anathema. Other sorts of investor found other sorts of objections. I can't explain credit default swap to my investors, was a common response to Greg Lipman's pitch. Or I have a cousin who works at Moody's and he say this stuff, subprime mortgage bond, is all good. Or I talked to Bear Stearns and they said, you're crazy. Lipman spent 20 hours with one hedge fund guy and thought he had him sold, only to have the guy call his college roommate who worked for some home builders and change his mind. I'm gonna stop here first. Right, that's part 1. Right, I don't know if I can finish the 15 minutes or not, but I'm gonna keep going right now. Another 15 minutes starting now. Wait, there you go. Right, start. But the most common response of all from investors who heard Lipman's argument was, I'm convinced you're right, but it's not my job to short the subprime market. That's why the opportunity exists, Lipman would reply. It's nobody's job. It wasn't Lipman's either. He was meant to be the toll booth, taking a little from buyers and sellers as they passed through his trading book. He was now in a different, more opinionated relationship to his market and his employers. Lipman's short position may have been forced upon him, but by the end of 2005, he'd make it his own and grown it to $1 billion. 16 floors above him inside Deutsche Bank's Wall Street headquarters, several hundred highly paid employees bought the prime mortgage loan, packed them into bonds, and sold them off. Another group packed the most repellent, unsellable tranches of those bonds and the CDS on the bonds into CDOs. The bigger Lipman's short position grew, the greater the implicit expression of contempt for these people and their industry. An industry quickly becoming Wall Street's most profitable business. The running cost in premiums Lipman paid was tens of millions of dollars a year, and his losses looked even bigger. The buyer of credit default swap agreed to pay premium for the lifespan of the underlying mortgage bond, so long as the underlying bond remained outstanding. Both buyer and seller of credit default swap were obliged to post collateral in response to their price movement. Astonishingly, the price of subprime mortgage bonds were rising. Within a few months, Lipman's credit default swap position had to be marked down by $30 million. His superior repeatedly asked him to explain why he was doing what he was doing. A lot of people wonder if this was the best use of Greg's time and our money, said a senior Deutsche Bank official who watched the growing conflict. Rather than cave to the pressure, Lipman instead had an idea for making it vanish, kill a new market. AIG was very nearly the only buyer of AAA rated CDOs, that is BBB rated subprime mortgage repackaged into AAA rated CDOs. AIG was ultimately the party on the other side of the credit default swap. Mayberry was buying. If AIG stopped buying bonds, or more exactly, stopped insuring them against default, the entire subprime mortgage bond market might collapse, and Lipman's credit default swap would be worth a fortune. At the end of 2005, Lipman flew to London to try to make that happen. He met with an AIG-FP employee named Tom Fielding, who worked directly for AIG-FP's head, Joe Casano. Lipman, who was forever adding data to his presentation, produced his latest version of shorting mezzanine home equity tranches. He walked Fielding through his argument. Fielding offered him no serious objection, and Lipman left AIG's London office feeling as if Fielding had been converted to his cause. Sure enough, shortly after Lipman's visit, AIG-FP stopped selling credit default swap. Even better, AIG-FP hinted that they might actually like to buy some credit default swap. In anticipation of selling them some, Lipman accumulated more. For a brief moment, Lipman thought he had changed the world all by himself. He had walked into AIG-FP and had shown them how Deutsche Bank, along with every other Wall Street firm, was playing them for fools, and they had understood. Chapter 4. How to harvest a migrant worker. They hadn't. Not really. The first person inside AIG-FP to awaken to the madness of his firm's behavior and sound an alarm was not Tom Fielding, who quickly forgot his meeting with Lipman, but Jane Park. Park worked in AIG-FP's Connecticut office and sat close enough to the credit default swap traders who have a general idea of what they were up to. In mid-2005, he read a front-page story in the Wall Street Journal about the mortgage lender New Century. He noted how high the company's dividend was and wondered if he should buy some of its stock for himself. As he dug into New Century, however, Park saw that they owned all these subprime mortgages, and he could see from their own statements that the quality of these loans were frighteningly poor. Soon after his private investigation of New Century, Park had a phone call from a penniless, jobless old college friend who had been offered several loans from banks to buy a house he couldn't afford. That's when the penny dropped for him. Park had noticed his colleague, AI Frost, announcing credit default swap deal with big Wall Street firm at a new clip. A year before, Frost might have done $1 billion deal each month. Now he was doing 20, all of them ensuring putatively diversified pile of customer loan. We were doing every single deal with every single Wall Street firm except Citigroup, said one trader. Citigroup decided it liked the risk and kept it on their book. We took all the rest. When traders asked Frost why Wall Street was suddenly so eager to do business with AIG, as one put it, he will explain that they like us because we could act quickly. Park put 2 and 2 together and guessed that the nature of this pile of consumer loan insured by AIG-FP was changing, that they contained a lot more subprime mortgage than anyone knew, and that if US homeowners began to default in sharply greater numbers, AIG didn't have anywhere near the capital required to cover the losses. When he brought this up at a meeting, his reward was to be hauled into a separate room by Joe Casano, who screamed at him that he didn't know what he was talking about. Joe Casano, the boss of AIG-FP, was the son of a police officer and had been a political science major at Brooklyn College. Seems in retrospect far less relevant than his need for obedience and total control. He had spent most of his career first at Drexel Burnham and then at AIG-FP, not as a bond trader but working in the back office. Across AIG-FP, the view of the boss was remarkably consistent. Casano was a guy with a cruel feel for financial risk, but a real talent for bullying people who doubt him. AIG-FP became a dictatorship, said one London trader. Joe would bully people around. He'll he would humiliate them and then try to make it up to them by giving them huge amount of money. One day he got me on the phone and was pissed off about a trade that had lost money. Say a Connecticut trader. He said, when you lose money, it's my fucking money. Say it. I said, what? Say, Joe, it's your fucking money. So I said, it's your fucking money, Joe. A culture change, said a third trader. The fear level was so high that when we had these morning meetings, you present what you did not to upset him. And if you were critical of the organization, all hell would break loose. Say a fourth. Joe always said, this is my company. You work for my company. He'll say, he'll see you with a bottle of water. He'll come over and say, that's my water. Lunch was free, but Joe always made you feel he had bought it. And a fifth, under Joe, the debate and discussion that was common under Tom salvaged the previous CEO case. I would say to Tom what I'm saying to you, but with Joe as the audience. A sixth, the way you dealt with Joe was to start everything by saying, you're right, Joe. I'm gonna continue later. Even by the standards of Wall Street villains whose character flaw wind up being exaggerated to fit the crime, Cassano in the retelling became a cartoon monster. One day he came in and saw that someone had left the weights on the Smith machine in the gym. Say a seventh source on Connecticut. He was literally walking around looking for people who looked buff, trying to find the guy who did it. He was screaming, who left the fucking weight on the fucking Smith machine? Who left the fucking weight on the fucking Smith machine? Oddly, Cassano was as likely to direct his anger at profitable traders as at unprofitable ones, for the anger was triggered not by financial loss, but by the faintest whiff of insurrection. Even more oddly, his anger had no obvious effect on the recipient's paycheck. A trader might find himself routinely abused by his boss and yet delighted by his year-end bonus, determined by that same boss. One reason none of AIGFP's traders took a swing at Joe Cassano before walking out the door was that the money was simply too good. A man who valued loyalty and obedience above all other trade had no tool to command it except money. Money worked as a management tool, but only up to a point. If you were going to be on the other side of a trade from Goldman Sachs, you had better know what exactly Goldman Sachs was up to. AIGFP could attract extremely bright people who were perfectly capable of keeping up with their counterparts at Goldman Sachs. They were constrained, however, by a boss with an imperfect understanding of the nuances of his own business and whose judgment was clouded by his insecurity. Toward the end of 2005, Cassano promoted Al Frost. Then went looking for someone to replace him as the ambassador to Wall Street's bond trading desk. The job, in effect, was to say yes every time some Wall Street trader asked him if he'd like to insure, and so, in effect, purchased a $1 billion pile of bond backed by consumer loan. For a number of reasons, Jane Park was a likely candidate, and so he decided to examine these loans that AIGFP was insuring a bit more closely. The magnitude of the misunderstanding shocked him. The supposedly diversified pile of consumer loan now consists almost entirely of U.S. prime mortgages. Park conducted a private survey. He asked the people most directly involved in the decision to sell credit default swap on consumer loan what percentage of those loans were prime mortgages. He asked Gary Galton, a Yale professor who had built the model that Cassano used to price the credit default swap. Cotton guessed that the Park were no more than 10% subprime. He asked a risk analyst in London who guessed 20%. None of them knew it was 95%. Said one trader, and I'm sure that Cassano didn't either. In retrospect, their ignorance seems incredible, but then an entire financial system was premised on their not knowing and paying them for this talent. By the time Joe Cassano invited Jane Park to London for the meeting in which he would be promoted to the job of creating even more of these ticking bomb, Park knew he wanted no part of it. If he was forced to take the job, he said he'll quit. This naturally infuriated Joe Cassano, who accused Park of being lazy, of dreaming up reasons not to do the deals that would require complicated paperwork. Cannot to do the deals that would require complicated paperwork. Confronted with the new fact that this company was effectively long $50 billion in BBB subprime mortgage bonds, masquerading as AAA rated diversified pool of consumer loan. Cassano at first sought to rationalize it. He clearly thought that any money he received for selling default insurance on highly rated bond was free money. For the bond to default, he now said U.S. house prices had to fall, and Joe Cassano didn't believe house prices could ever fall anywhere in the country at once. After all, Moody's and S&P had both rated his stuff AAA. Cassano nevertheless agreed to meet with all the big Wall Street firms and discuss the logic of their deals, to investigate how a bunch of shaky loan could be transformed into a AAA bond. Together with Gene Park and a few others, he set out on a series of meetings with traders at Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, and the rest, all of whom argued how unlikely it was for housing prices to fall all at once. They all said the same thing, said one of the traders present. They go back to historical real estate prices over 60 years and say they had never fallen nationally all at once. 2 months after their meeting with Goldman Sachs, one of the AIGFP traders bumped into the Goldman guy who had made his argument and who now said, "Between you and me, you're right. These things are going to blow up." The AIGFP trader present were shocked by how little thought or analysis seemed to underpin this prime mortgage machine. It was simply a bet that home prices would never fall. Once he understood this, and once he could construct it as his own idea, Joe Cassano changed his mind. By early 2006, he openly agreed with Gene Park. AIGFP shouldn't insure any more of these deals, though they would continue to insure the one they had already insured. At the time, this decision didn't really seem like all that big a deal for AIGFP. The division was generating almost $2 billion a year in profits. At the peak, the entire credit default swap business contributed only $180 million of that. Cassano had been upset with Park and slow to change his mind. It seemed mainly because Park had dared to contradict him. All right. That was it. Part, I think 7 or 8. I'll see you guys in the next part. Bye, guys.